SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, oh my. What is all of this auditing terminology and lingo really all about? And like Jason, do you lie awake at night asking yourself, is the SOC really a certification or is it just an audit? Well, I wish I had those answers, but I don't. However, we've done you one better tonight. We've got a very special guest on with us that knows all about these audits, and she is going to educate you because it's her job to keep you and your organization and your auditing scene in check.
Whoa, Kevin, let's slow this pony horse down. So there's really only a SOC 1 and a SOC 2. There's no SOC 3 because I only have 2 feet.
Oh, hold on a minute, I'm processing that. So you're of the opinion that the SOC is actually a literal sock that goes on your foot. Is that what you're saying?
That's what we're talking about tonight, aren't we?
No. You're a moron. And what we're talking about is system and organizational controls and protecting your business, Jason.
Oh, that one. Yeah, I remember that. That's the other one we're talking about.
I hope you're just screwing around.
I am.
Okay. I thought we were going to have to back out and do a completely different episode tonight. But go ahead. Please introduce our very special guest for the evening so that we can get on with the show.
All right. So tonight, Kevin, our guest is principal at UHY LLC. And at UHY, she has performed hundreds and hundreds of SOC audits. I've had the privilege of working with her over the last 3 years in a capacity where I am assessing and advising on technical risk associated with the SOC audits. It being a SOC 1, typically a SOC 2 Type 1 or a SOC 2 Type 2, and whatever additional layers of controls a client might want to add to it, or frameworks that they might want to add to those to that control set. So I am so happy to have her on the show tonight. She is a person that has deep knowledge on this process. She will fill the gaps that many of you are interested in trying to figure out. Do I really even need this? Why are we still doing SOC audits in this day and age? You're going to find that out tonight because she's bringing the knowledge. So with that, let's go jump into this thing and find out how you're going to do your next SOC. Episode 6, Surviving Your First Regulatory Audit.
Hello and welcome to the Cyber Distortion Podcast. We have an excellent episode for you tonight, and we'll be focused on a very important topic in the world of businesses. And we're going to focus on the topic of regulatory audits. You know, it's been said that compliance is the foundation of security. We all know you don't build your castle on shifting sand. And in the same manner, you can't build a solid security foundation without compliance. And tonight's special guest is no stranger to helping companies navigate through these tricky waters. Her name is Stacie Grimm. Stacie, welcome, and thanks for joining us on this little adventure tonight. This is going to be a lot of fun. And I just wanted to open this up to you to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here. Yes, I am Stacie Grimm, and I'm a principal at UHY. We're a top 30 national CPA firm, and we specialize in a variety of compliance and third-party risk management services, including SOC, PCI, HIPAA, ISO, and GDPR compliance. Really, I really enjoy being an auditor, meeting these different tech companies, and not a day goes by that I don't whip out my pocket protector, my nerdy library glasses, and my auditor face when I show up, just to scare them.
Oh, man.
No, I enjoy being an auditor because I truly believe we can add value to a company help them sleep at night. And I find it fascinating to be part of an industry that's constantly changing and evolving. So thanks for having me.
Stacie,
Yeah, absolutely.
that auditor face almost reminded me of, are you sure you don't want to retract that statement?
I don't believe a word you're saying.
Right.
So are you confident in this evidence that you're submitting?
Right.
You're told, is this your final answer?
So it's great. It was great having you on here tonight, and I've been looking forward to this for a while. I think we have this area of auditing and compliance around certain controls or processes and procedures has been this great area for a lot of people for a long time. Way back in the olden days, there was the SAS 70 audit, and people kind of understood what that was. It was this thing that at one point was demanded that you would do. And over the years, that changed, and and as technology has ebbed and flowed and changed on us, we kind of lost sight into what the value is around doing audits of this type, and what that value is to these two organizations, either for themselves and for their customers. So I think this gives us an opportunity to give a lot of deep insights to people, and maybe even change the understanding of why these types of audits are important and what they can do for you, and how it can really be a valuable piece of your organization. So I'm really happy to have that conversation tonight, and I know that from working with you over the past 3 years that there's a lot that you can bring to the table to help our audience understand these types of things. I think one place to start would be kind of diving into the difference between compliance and what really is a compliance audit, right? What is the scope of that, and help us in the audience understand a little bit more about what they're diving into when they decide to do something like this.
Sure. Yeah, at a high level, a compliance audit it's an evaluation of the strength and thoroughness of a company's compliance preparations, including, for example, it's implemented security policies, its user access controls, and risk management procedures. Essentially, it validates whether you're doing what you said you were doing, and that gives people reassurance. So, as you may guess, what precisely goes into a compliance exam or an audit varies depending on whether the organization is public or private, what type of data it handles, the industry in which it operates, and if it stores or transmits sensitive data. For instance, Sarbanes-Oxley, a SOX compliance audit would focus more on proving that any electronic communication is backed up and secured within a reasonable disaster recovery infrastructure. Whereas healthcare providers that store or transmit e-health records, including PHI, are subject to the HIPAA laws and regulations. So that's going to look differently. And financial service companies that transmit credit card data are subject to PCI requirements. In each case, an organization must be able to demonstrate that their compliance by producing an audit trail. And that's key. You can't just say, yeah, I got this all in place. You got to be able to prove it. And
darn.
And that often is generated through data from manual documents, system evidence, and can leverage different internal and external audits. So,
you said something
Excellent.
in the definition that you are doing what you said you were doing. And when you said that, I thought, man, I could really use having an audit done on Kevin, because he's always telling me he's doing something and he's not doing it.
Yeah.
Happy to help.
But go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I was just going to say, I know there's a lot of people that are going to be listening to this, and they're going to be saying, "Well, we do a lot of this stuff already," and you know, in a way, a lot of people are doing a lot of this. It's possible that you are. It's possible that you do have pretty good controls in place, and many companies that are not bound to any type of regulatory authority have good internal controls, and in some cases, they even have an internal compliance team or a risk and governance department that's responsible specifically just for this, managing the risk inside the company. A lot of publicly traded companies are in that boat today, and a lot of that really is going to be based on the size of the company in a lot of cases, of course. Um, but there's a huge difference between doing your own internal compliance and managing your own internal controls and having a third party independent audit done on your company. And I heard a joke the other day uh, on the definition of an auditor being a person that solves a problem in a way that you didn't know you had. Well, no, wait, how does it go? The person solves a problem that you didn't know you had in a way that you don't understand. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And I thought that's pretty good. I mean, that's it's silly, but it's true. Most of the time when auditors are speaking to us, technical folks, we don't really know what they're saying from a legislative standpoint or from a regulatory standpoint. We just know we've got controls in place, right? We're wanting to submit that evidence and get the nerves away because we always feel like they're in there to catch us doing something wrong, right? But it's very important that you do it. It's very critical that companies, lose that stigma that auditors are bad. They're not bad. They're there to help you. It's critically important that you bring them in. And the key reason for that is that you need that third party, unbiased
Mm.
opinion on how good of a job you're really doing. And so that's why we encourage people to look into regulatory audits and preferably putting your security controls over a framework. It makes a lot of sense. So, Stacie, with that in mind, I was going to ask if you could talk a little bit about the differences from your perspective in an internal and an external audit.
Absolutely. And you've kind of alluded and hit on the main things. Internal audits are carried out by employees of a company to gauge the overall risks to compliance and to security, and to determine whether the company is following its internal guidelines. Internal audits may occur throughout the fiscal year, and reports generated may be used by management teams to identify areas within the company that require improvement, or they're used to measure company objectives against output and the company's strategic risks. Where on the other hand, like you said, external audits are formal compliance audits that are carried out by an independent third party and follow that specific format that's determined based on the compliance regulation being assessed. So external audit reports measure if an organization is complying with state, federal, or corporate regulations, rules, standards, or a particular framework. The auditor's reports will be used by regulators to assess possible fines for noncompliance, or by the C-suite to prove regulatory compliance. And it's really worthwhile to note that an external compliance auditor can still also and may still also use internal audit reports and findings to further evaluate compliance and regulatory risk management efforts. So it really is, you can have a lot of technical and industry-specific expertise within your organization, but an external audit will really give you that, like you said, independent, unbiased assessment. And there's other benefits too. Sometimes, we see a lot of different companies in a lot of different industries, and we can oftentimes even recommend efficiencies or propose best practices and so forth too, that are just beneficial, not just for that particular audit, but for the business in general, which is a fun part of what we do, is say, hey, I could save you some money, or I could save you some time, which is equally valuable. So
Yeah. So here's something
Awesome.
interesting that I thought both of you were saying that I think it's important to repeat. One is that when we look at um, doing an audit, when anyone first approaches doing an audit, especially if they haven't done one for a very long time, or if they're just doing it for the first time, they are typically scared, or they come in very cautious around doing the audit because they're worried about how well the policies, procedures, systems that they've put in place are going to match up to expectations. And there's reasons for that. Not that they're bad reasons at all, but the reasons are, if all you do is internal audits, then the standard you are setting yourself and your organization up to is your own internal standard, and that's it. So when you compare yourself to other organizations in your same marketplaces or other organizations of the same size, you have no standard that is crossing those organizations that you're measuring yourself up to, unless you choose a standard or a framework that supports those organizations, things like HIPAA or GDPR or things to that effect. So it's very important to think about the differences between those two and what you're gaining from doing an internal audit over doing an external audit, because there's value in both, and there are reasons for both, and they both, I think, are important to an organization based on the standard that you're trying to compare yourself against. That being said, going back, and you're looking at the uh, you know being worried or being cautious about what you're trying to do when you approach this, I have been a part of many audits with Stacie, and the message is always one in which they are trying to work with you as a client, not against you, not trying to catch you doing something wrong. They're trying to help you be better at what you're doing. And so, a way of doing that is to think about the two of you as a team. And I'm bringing on a team member that's going to help look at my structures, my procedures, my policies, my systems in a different way, to do exactly what you just said, Kevin, when you were saying earlier, to find things in a way that maybe I didn't even think about, looking at it. And then it gives me the opportunity to further assess that, because that finding might be something that says, I've done it like this forever, but actually I get what you're saying. You're saying that I could be better at this if I also did these things as well. And that might promote then either a risk assessment, or it might promote me doing some change management into my environment to improve how I'm doing things. And if you're doing this every year, eventually the audits get a lot easier, right? Because
Right, right.
you're adhering to a bigger standard that you're comparing yourself against, and you're focused on it, right? And just like anything you're focused on, you will carry out that focus throughout the year, because at the end of that cycle you're going to have an audit coming along, and you have to produce the evidence that they're going to be asking for, and you're preparing for that throughout the
Right.
year. And that in and of itself just makes you better.
Well, I think you said something really important there, and it goes back to the whole stigma of having an audit done in the first place. And I think people have this misconception that because you're paying an auditor to come in and perform a service for you, or because you're paying a pen tester in the same manner to come in and perform that service for you, that they're under the gun to prove their worth. And by doing that, they're in there to make you look as bad as they could possibly make you look, because they've got to find evidence that you need their help, right? And I think a lot of people, and I used to be guilty of that mindset early on, until I had been doing these things long enough to realize, oh, wait a minute, no, that's absolutely the wrong outlook to have here. Because when you start to realize the value of an unbiased opinion on your infrastructure and your environment, that pays dividends back to you and putting you on the upper end of the curve as it relates to other companies in the same industry or other companies of your same size. And I think it's critically important that as you're getting better about these controls, uh, it's an opportunity for you to mature every single year when you have yourself re-audited. Otherwise, you're sitting there stagnant and assuming that your controls are good enough, which in most cases they
Yeah,
never
that's a good point. And so, good question there, Stacie. So, when you guys sit down to do these audits and you're looking at the landscape of the clients that are coming to you guys to do one, how often are they coming to you because one of their either potential customers or existing customers are saying, I need you to do this?
The vast majority, it's the company is kind of forced into this direction because their clients are demanding it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's not, it's not a bad thing. Sometimes it's good to be kind of forced into that direction, but it's also hugely valuable to be proactive and kind of try to anticipate some of that and say, hey, you know what, this is good for my organization. This is just good for our overall security, our continuity, our long-term strategic plans, to have it in place. And like you guys said, I mean, auditors aren't, they're not out there to be gotcha auditors and like, hey, we want you to succeed. We don't want you to fail. So there's plenty of opportunity for you know pre-assessments and readiness assessments. You don't have to just jump into a compliance audit blind or out of the blue. You can, ease into it if you plan ahead. You've got the time to do it, and you can have those tools and those resources and feel confident, then going into it. So, always something to think about. This is a journey. It's a long-term plan, and even just being transparent up front about your current state of affairs and is gonna just end up helping you more in the long run. So.
I think it's important for us to be able to kind of dive a little bit deeper on the SOC part of the assessments that are being done. So, just for clarity's sake, I want to make sure all of you up and coming CISSPs out there, this is testable content. So, perk your ears up and pay attention. You're going to hear it firsthand from an expert who's going to tell you everything about SOC. And so be ready for that. Second to that, SOC is not a compliance. It is not an audit. It is an examination. And when an auditor comes in, they're there to examine the information you're providing them in accordance to controls that have been set about by AICPA as a group of controls in details that are recommended as a acceptable set of practices that should be performed. So, given that context, we're going to have Stacie dive a little bit deeper into that explanation so that you guys can understand that a little bit better and give everyone a better understanding of what is the difference even between a SOC 1 and a SOC 2 and a SOC 2 Type 1 and a SOC 2 Type 2. If this is the first time you're hearing of this, you might be pretty confused. So, Stacie, help us navigate this a little bit.
Of course. So you're right that SOC exams are not audits. but they are very similar. We still perform an assessment and we still provide an opinion at the conclusion of it to say, yes, everything was materially accurate. There were no significant deficiencies and so forth. But by the pure definition, it's not technically an audit. So diving into SOC. First off, a SOC exam can only be performed by a CPA. That is a requirement. And at the core, these audits. God, now you got me saying it. These exams.
So they are an audit. Is that what you're saying?
No, they are not.
These exams gauge the service delivery of a system and how it fulfills the selected trust service categories for like a SOC 2. So at their highest level, a SOC 1 is a report on the internal controls over financial reporting. It's a restricted use report. It's primarily used by auditors of your company, of your customers. So for instance, a payroll provider would get a SOC 1 report, and their clients and those clients' auditors would primarily use it. This is similar to like the sock on your left foot, we'll say. Yeah, you had.
So I told you there was two.
A SOC 2 is, a report on controls at a service organization. It's also a restricted report. It's used by the service organization's customers, their partners, and others, and it's oftentimes and primarily part of vendor management procedures. This could be maybe the sock on your left foot, or your right foot. I think
on your right foot.
And then a SOC 3, so I don't know where you're going to put this sock, but maybe on your hand. But a SOC 3...
This is your toboggan.
A SOC 3 is very similar to a SOC 2. It requires all the same work of a SOC 2, but the report is general and it's used more for marketing purposes. So you could put this on your website if you wanted to. Type 1 reports. So this could be a Type 1 SOC, a SOC 1 Type 1 or a SOC 2 Type 1 is as of a point in time and it only assesses the design of controls. Whereas a Type 2, a SOC 1 Type 2 or a SOC 2 Type 2 covers a period of time and assesses not only the design of those controls, that those are designed properly, but that they are operating effectively over that period of time. So if your customers know what they're doing, they're gonna want to get a SOC 2 or SOC 1 Type 2 report, because it's one thing to say, yep, this is designed, it's a great starting point, but they want to know that these are actually operating effectively and that you're doing and those things that you say you're doing.
So Stacie, is that what you mean when you say operating effectively, that the control is there, it's designed the way it's supposed to be and intended to be designed, but that you're providing the correct evidence to show that the controls are being used in the right way?
Right. So this is actually sampling and saying, okay, you've got 1,000 changes that were pushed out through your application development cycle, your CI/CD process. We're going to test a handful of those and test each component, each aspect of that, that are the key controls, the key pieces of it, and that those are being followed in accordance with your policies and procedures.
Got it.
Yep. So you might not know, which one do I want? Which SOC 1, SOC 2, what's right for me? The way a company might determine which report makes the most sense for them is by looking at the service they provide. For instance, does it impact your customers' financials, the data they process, and the information they store? Some companies might find it valuable to get multiple reports. For instance, a healthcare insurance claim processor, they would need to get a SOC 1, because we're talking about premiums, we're talking about claims payments. Those impact, their clients' financial statements. But they may also want a SOC 2 because they process and store EPHI. So there could be a benefit to having both. And then when we dive into kind of that SOC 2 a little bit more, just to add some more, it gets more confusing, but to try to simplify it, there are 5 basic trust service categories within a SOC 2. So once you say, all right, SOC 2 is right for me, now you have to figure out which categories do we want in scope. And those are security. Security is the foundation. It's the minimum requirement for any SOC 2 report. And it covers everything from entity level controls and administrative controls to more technical controls, including user access controls, application development, system monitoring, endpoint controls, you name it. Confidentiality. Confidentiality addresses sensitive data that a company wants restricted and protected. Again, your customers may say, hey, I want you guys to address confidentiality because you're dealing with some of our proprietary information. Availability. So if the process, product, or service you provide must remain available per your agreement between your customer and the service provider, this may be a good fit for you. And these availability commitments could be in SLAs or so forth. Processing integrity is really addressing system processing and that it's complete, valid, accurate, timely, and authorized to meet some business objective. And privacy is really focused on EPHI, personal information with regard to generally accepted principles of privacy. So those are the 5 categories. Again, you'll work usually closely with your customers because they're the ones that want the report, and so you want to keep them happy. So,
yeah, I like to think of when I break down the difference between a SOC 2 Type 1 and a SOC 2 Type 2. I like to break down the differences as such. A Type 1 is you saying what you do as it pertains to the given set of controls laid out by AICPA and whatever trust service principles you're going to follow. And then the Type 2 is validating that what I said I was going to do, what I've documented that I do, I'm actually doing it. And I can give you evidence that I'm actually doing it. And that's where I get it covered in the Type 2. So it's one thing to say that I do these things. That's great, right? That shows the coverage that I have within my organization for policies and procedures and practices that I'm doing. The second one says, yep, accurately, not only do I have these things documented, I'm actually making sure these things happen throughout my entire fiscal year. This is happening. And that just raises the confidence level. And so that's kind of the easiest way, I think, of looking at it when we look at those 2 things.
Yeah, if you've never done one before, a Type 1 is a good first step. Again, we don't want to set you up for failure. It tells you, yes, it addresses, are there any gaps? Are there any design deficiencies? Because you don't want to jump into a Type 2. You've got 6 months down the road. You think you've been following what's, you thought was right. And then you get to the end and you get a report and you've got a whole bunch of issues. So.
Yeah, that report shows that not only you've designed your controls well, you're following your controls, but it also shows where you are in the maturity level of those controls, right? I mean, and that gives you something to strive to get better at year after year. You said something interesting about the trust principles, and I heard 3 of them that any CISSP is going to be very familiar with confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It's interesting that there's 2 additional trust controls in the world of SOC, in addition to the 3, the triad of CISSP.
Yeah, because there's pieces of that are really built into just security, just that common is that whole triad. But then if there are additional commitments, that's when, these confidentiality and availability really gets pulled in.
Right.
So, Stacie, on a serious note, before we end the night, if you had to offer up 3 key pieces of what you believe is the most important takeaways that people need to hear and know firsthand from the expert, what would that be?
Well, Jason, I would say that it is very important, and I would highly recommend any company out there to get an external assessment, whether it's a compliance audit, whether it's some sort of risk assessment, to get that independent third-party assessment, because I'm telling you, it will open your eyes. You're experts, everybody, but to have another set of eyes on it, it provides a lot of value. So highly recommend people to do that.
Yeah.
And probably just have 2. My other one would be, don't be hard on your auditors. We're not here to get you. I want you to view it more as a partnership, not an auditor auditee relationship. Transparency goes a long ways. There's, even if you're revealing a weakness, doesn't mean it's going to be the end of the world. There could be other ways to still accomplish the goal and still have clean opinions and whatnot. But having that transparency and so forth is really going to just help you, elevate your compliance game to the next level. So
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
So Kevin, I've got one for you. Lessons learned from tonight. What are some things that you might have learned from tonight?
Well, one key thing I think I've learned from tonight is that the SOC audit is not really an audit, and it's not a certification. It's actually really more or less just a test of your controls and your control strength. So I learned that. I didn't need to learn that auditors are not the enemy, because I knew that that was one of those lessons I had to learn over time, going through and dealing with pen testing and auditing and assessments and things like that. In the end, there was never an exercise that I've had anybody, a third party, come in and do where I didn't benefit from it and I didn't learn something and they weren't able to show me something that I did not know about my current configuration. And to me, I would much rather have a third party that I'm working with, that, as Stacie mentioned, is my partner, tell me about those things than have someone else discover those things and expose them. And that's the key takeaway. It's very important that you realize that there's a huge benefit in this, and take advantage of it. Take advantage of having a partner that does have an unbiased opinion.
Yeah, we don't want anyone in this audience to be on the news in the headlines, so.
Yeah, those are really good. So I have 2. My first one is that, when you look at the challenges that we face with bringing in someone outside to look at your systems, this conversation kind of just continues to affirm for me the philosophy that I try to follow, that there are no smartest people in the room, right? The smartest people in the room are the people that you bring together in the room, the people, right? And those people together, the right people together, can solve great problems. And that's why bringing in third-party teams to help you to discover the things that maybe you didn't see clearly create the smartest people in the room. And so that's a very important piece.
Yeah.
And the second part was, when I do podcasts like this, I am remembered. I remind myself how honored I am to have colleagues like the 2 of you to be able to have these conversations with, and to, go into these deeper dives around complex topics and try to make them easier for people to understand. And those things they're invaluable to me, so they have to be invaluable to other people. And I think that there will be a lot of people in our audience that will be happy that we had this specific conversation tonight, and they probably learned a lot around dispelling the noise for doing a SOC audit or a SOC exam of some type in the future, and hopefully they will. Hopefully they will do that. So
that's what it's all about.
So with that, I want to thank you, Stacie, for joining us tonight. Thank you for being part of the show and for providing us and our audience with your knowledge. And again, this is another one of those shows that we could so easily go into an hour. One of these days, we're going to have a whole just going to be a cyber distortion conference. And we're going to have all of these topics for it to talk about for as long as we want to talk about them.
Yeah. I know, all day event. We just bore people to
That's
death.
Right.
Huh? After a while, we'll start repeating ourselves.
So, all right. Well, with that, we want to thank you, and we'll thank you, our audience, for being a part of this show tonight and listening to us. And we hope you guys have gotten some value out of it. And we will see you next time.
Cheers, everybody.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. If you enjoyed the podcast today, I'm excited to share with you that you can now listen to us on all of these major streaming platforms. Also, if you learned anything from the conversation today, please share this episode with your friends, family, and colleagues. The more of this knowledge we can share, the more cyber secure we all become. I'd say like, subscribe, and all of that jazz, but hey, you're not morons. You know that. I will leave you with some words of wisdom, though, from the former director of the FBI, Mr. Robert S. Mueller III. He said there are only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. You guys be safe, remain diligent, and take care.